You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. A.m. in the Philippines. Good morning. This is Typhoon Surigae, Philippine name Bising, and it's still moving towards the northwest, making its closest approach in the next few hours to Samar, and then not long after to Catanduanes. Luckily, it's staying quite a bit away from the island of Samar. I think we're talking about 170 miles or so is the closest approach. It'll get slightly closer to Catanduanes as well. Signal 2 warnings in effect for both of those areas right now. And Signal 1 warnings extending up towards Luzon and for parts even to the extreme northern tip of Cebu at the latest Pagasa update, which I guess we will show first thing here before I introduce everyone. Just to show you, this is the latest from Pagasa. This was at 5 a.m. The Signal 1 warning extends just about into Camarines Norte, and for the rest of the Bicol region there, Signal 1. Masbate, Leyte, all under that signal, and the Signal 1 warnings are just about starting to ease for Surigay in Mindanao. Not Mindoro, which is over there off screen to the west and isn't under any warnings at all. Well, let's see if we can just change tack here. There's the JTWC warning map, and my name is Nathan Foy, and I'm joined by my team tonight, which consists of quite a few people, and they're all there right now. Joey, Thomas, David, Christian, Noah, and Xavier. Good evening to all of you.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are.
Hello.
Let's take a look. Thomas, you're showing the latest Force 13 cone.
Yeah, something to note with it. Xavier actually made this cone. The winds and pressure a little bit out of date. This is about 3 hours old. We had it at 175.902 at that point. We have it at 169.12. What is it?
914 right now.
914. So 160 miles per hour, 914 millibars right now is what we currently have this storm at. It is weakening due to an Eyewall replacement cycle. But some things to note with the cone. First things first, the center of circulation is not going to go over the Philippines. Yep. We're confident in that at this point. Even if it were to go outside of the cone a little bit, still wouldn't. Worst case scenario, I'd still say if you're in Catanduanes in particular, typhoon conditions, I'm not going to rule them out for a short period. If the center were to make the absolute closest possible approach. But as of now, I'd say strong winds, heavy rainfall, high waves, all of that. You still need to be watching out for that, especially if you're within the Signal 2 areas on this map. Xavier, since you made the forecast, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yes, so basically what we're forecasting is, of course, the cone is slightly out of date. This has been weakening to an Eyewall replacement cycle, as Thomas mentioned. And what we could be seeing is some intensification once it completes this Eyewall replacement cycle due to this entering the area of the highest ocean heat content, which is very good for tropical cyclones. So this might have a short strengthening window tomorrow, but this is not going to get anywhere near where it was earlier, where we saw it reach a peak intensity of 185 miles an hour.
Let's take a little look at the... Go ahead.
So it's going to be moving pretty slow. So it's going to be moving into a very slow pattern, less than 10 miles an hour. It's been moving at about 12 miles an hour, steady for the last several hours, and that will be part of the reason it'll be slowly weakening. And by 5 days from now, it will definitely be out of the Philippines area and weakening below major status, hopefully.
Let's take a look at the latest imagery of the storm right now. It's taking a few seconds to load here, but it will appear on the screen very shortly, we hope. There it is. There's the storm right now. This is the latest close-up rapid scan imagery from Himawari 8. The infrared leaves a lot to be desired with the look of the storm right now. It's been degrading quite substantially, but a lot of people advising caution, and that may not what we're seeing on the face of it is not necessarily what's happening inside. Would anyone like to talk about that?
Yeah, the storm is now deep into an hour replacement cycle. Thomas might pull up the microwave imagery, the latest from the storm.
Yeah, I have that up.
Yep. We're looking at it now.
Old inner eyewall is weakening and pretty much dying right now, and that makes the satellite appearance so extremely marginal and ragged. And the outer eyewall will now take over, which is substantially larger, which would also mean that the eye is will be much larger, and that will probably mean that we won't see an extreme intensification phase, as a larger eye isn't so favorable when you have rapid intensification.
Now, Thomas, you're looking at that outer wall there. That currently spans 2 degrees of grid space there.
It's very, very large, and this is something that we've seen Westpac storms do before. I think this is still above average when it comes to the size of an eyewall coming out of an eyewall replacement cycle, but the reality is, due to how large this is, it's going to result in higher waves for the Philippines. More rainfall could get to the Philippines. The storm overall is going to be bigger, but in good news, it's going to be much more difficult for this storm to really get going into that upper end of intensity when it comes to storms here. We're not going to see a 185, 190 mile an hour peak out of this thing again, just due to the sheer size of that eye. At least we don't think. It's not totally impossible just because of how good the conditions are, but I'd be saying it's pretty unlikely at this point.
Yeah, I've sent into the live output chat a map of the ocean heat content, and it's pretty obvious that the maximized ocean heat content is right around now, and when it passes near the latitude of Manila, it will decrease substantially, and that's probably when we see the storm weakening quite a bit. So for the next 24 to 48 hours, it has quite favorable conditions when it comes to wind shear and also the ocean heat content and sea surface temperatures.
Now, you've marked the storm there, Thomas. I put it slightly south and west of that, just on the very edge of the circle, but you get the idea. Still got those oranges. We just can't quite see the scale there. What does that actually represent?
I don't know.
Well, so to some degree, it's called mixed layer depth. So it's how deep those warm waters go, and I believe it is how deep that threshold of 26 Celsius gets.
Yep.
I have another map of the 26-degree isotherm, actually. Wait a minute.
We can get that here shortly, but this is basically going to show you how deep do those warm waters run. So the closer you get to 100, the better.
Yeah.
And then we can actually see here. There we go.
Probably around 120 meters of 26-degree isotherm down into the ocean, so that's a lot.
It's quite deep, yeah, and we can see there just how deep these go. But this is basically just how much heat content there is. Mixed layer depth in meters is just, I guess, how deep exactly those waters go, how rich they are.
So that's an algorithm really that's an algorithm that balances the sea surface, not the surface, but the whole sea temperatures.
Yes.
And the other one that you showed there is the 26-degree depth.
Yes, how deep those run. Yeah, so those are both quite important, and they both show a very similar point of data when it comes to just how deep they run. But yeah, that's what we're looking at right now in terms of the storm. It's in pretty good conditions right now, and it's got microwave showing a double eyewall. If that cycle can manage to complete here within the next few hours, it could re-intensify a bit before it does really get going, moving out to sea here. And again, we are only in April, so you're not going to have you're not really going to have the same kind of conditions up north that you normally would in July, August, that kind of thing. So we're not going to be seeing a really strong storm heading towards like Japan or those general areas. But an extratropical cyclone could be heading up in that general direction. We'll see what exactly happens there. But yeah, right now the general structure of the storm. The infrared satellite showing what I would consider to be a misleadingly weak storm. Relative to what it probably actually is right now. Hence why we still have it as a Category 5 storm right now.
Let's take a look at some of the earlier imagery. This was the storm earlier on today, and just how I want us to talk a bit about the storm. Was that imagery going when it was peaking, and how conditions allowed it to do that, and what's caused the current weakening. We know Eyewall replacement cycle, but is this how many are we on now?
I believe this is the third cycle in Surigay's life. The third Eyewall replacement cycle we've seen. Is it the second? I thought it was the third.
I think it's the second.
Okay.
So we had the storm basically formed because we had a massive MJO pulse in the Western Pacific that formed a big westerly wind burst and a disturbance, which was shown by the GFS to get very strong 15 days ago. So very good forecast there. And the storm was basically in those extremely warm sea surface temperatures that are also above average, and we had just low wind shear and very intense polar outflow channel, and that just allowed it to explode in those conditions. And the reason why it has been weakening is just because of an Eyewall replacement cycle.
Yeah, there's nothing about the conditions that have really deteriorated, so it's still got conditions to soar back up if it were a smaller storm.
Now, our all the people in our community, it's been a hub of activity all day today, talking about what peak intensity this storm might have achieved. Do you want to provide some commentary on what you're thinking this is right now, or was it peak? Sorry.
Yeah, I could do.
Sure.
So, we earlier we had a SMAP pass that supported an intensity of 155 knots. That's 180 miles per hour. And after that, the storm was still improving in IR satellite presentation, which probably meant that we had, from that 155 knots, we had still some intensification. And the question is, how much did it intensify? I personally think it peaked at around 185 miles per hour with a pressure that I derived from CKC with 897 millibars.
Very close to what we've run with on our updates so far. Our peak was 185 and 895, of course. Reanalysis, post-analysis will look at that.
And I was the one who did that update video today.
Yep, Christian, one of our video update producers, is also with us, and you've been following this storm. Yeah. Well, you've had to follow this storm fairly closely for your updates today.
I have done, and I was like, "There's no way," but that this was real. But yeah, I pinched myself basically, and it's still here. So yeah, and I'm not sure if people noticed, but in the update video that there was, the icon's a bit different.
It was.
Yeah.
Ping.
Normally, I only use that icon for 180 mile an hour and above storms.
Yep. Now, Thomas, you're on the our official cyclone analyst team. What
Yes.
did you think about the storm's peak?
So the peak of the storm, and I know you were showing imagery of it a little bit ago, you can see just that absolutely massive burst that came out on the
It did.
southwestern side of things. It was just huge. It was like that was where the weak quadrant was that was really preventing things, and suddenly you had this minus 84 ring or something crazy like that around the whole storm. And so the biggest thing that really prevents me from going anywhere above 185 or 190 if we're pushing it is how symmetrical that the storm was. You can see the eye looks like, if you pinpoint the very center of the blob of convection itself, the eye is going to be slightly to the northwest, and it's those little things when you get storms this strong that prevent you from going much higher than that 185, 190 mile an hour threshold. I think either one of those two is reasonable. I know that Dvorak and the advanced Dvorak technique, so our ADT and subjective Dvorak by professionals over at NOAA had this thing all the way up to 105 miles per hour. I don't exactly agree with that. Yeah, they both had it up to 195. But I don't believe that's exactly what happened, just because of the duration of time that the storm looked like this, as well as other data, again, like that 155 knot support that we got from SMAP, which basically means that if we were to take a look at the relative improvement from more concrete data, 185, I think, is the safer call.
Yeah.
And the obligatory statement at this point that we wish we had Recon.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes, that would have been fantastic to see with a storm like this. You know, this is definitely a big one, and especially for the month of April, it would have been really interesting to see just how exactly this came to be. But there it is, you just saw it on your screen, that peak imagery. Just incredible intensification phase there, just absolutely explosive. And again, you're seeing minus 90s in chunks of this.
Yeah,
During the
it
peak,
was.
which you don't see very often. You don't see that often at all. Even in these really strong storms, you don't see minus 90s popping up and about all over the place all the time. So
Actually,
that's really something to see.
The only storm where the CDO was so cold with the minus 90s I can remember is Olaf of 2005, which was an absolute beast. What I also wanted to add is, Thomas, you're absolutely right about the storm's CDO structure. And that together with the banding helped me from fixing that at T 8.0, and I went with T 7.5, and yeah, essentially with this map has arrived at around 185 mile per hour.
Absolutely. I mean, this thing it's still a monster. I mean, we still have a high-end Category 4 to Category 5 storm here. But earlier today, it was an entirely different beast. Just incredible to see that kind of stuff unfold. And we really lucked out with this. This could have been a whole lot worse.
Yep.
I'm feeling very lucky that this storm's going to be mostly staying out to sea.
I should mention that rainfall
absolutely.
forecast estimates for Samar and Catanduanes have dropped slightly. We're talking maybe 300 to 400 millimeters of rain still, which is a lot. Imagine if this storm over water, Thomas, is probably going to deliver some areas in the storm's influence right now are probably going to get at some points 1,000 millimeters of rain.
It's still going to be a lot of rainfall there, 4 parts of the Philippines. And again, an Eyewall replacement cycle is going to allow for the storm to be bigger, which I think in turn, especially if this eye remains this big, could create bigger amounts of rainfall than currently forecast. I actually have the rain swath courtesy of the H-Wharf up.
Oh, hold on.
This is a really nice thing to look at. And you can see there, this is in inches, unfortunately. And I don't have exact conversions. I can actually get those real quick. But
I can help you, Thomas.
But we can see rather clearly that if the storm does track farther west, we're going to be seeing this 32-inch band And I mean, even 24 inches was just, I think, about 600-ish millimeters of rain. That's no joke. And in some of the more mountainous regions of the Philippines, we can still see some of those contours coming up. But absolute worst case scenario, if this tracks farther west, 32 inches of rain, or about 800 millimeters, I believe, is what you'll be getting over there in the Philippines. So still absolutely no joke. The rainfall threat's really going to be there with this one, and I do think that some storm surge concerns are still not completely out of the question, especially coming from the north into chunks of the Philippines that I'm circling here. Nathan, I know you know Philippines geography a little bit better than I do.
Yeah, the eastern part of Luzon, Bicol province, which is what you really circled there, and of course Catanduanes, which is the island that really sticks out, and of course was trashed by Goni just a few months ago. So that's obviously an area of concern. You're looking, just trying to get that zoom back on it there, Thomas. Looking back towards the islands themselves, I think there's some local amounts, maybe 8 inches there, and that would be, well, probably more than that because that's only about 200 millimeters. But we're looking at 300 to 400 by the looks of things.
Yeah, so that's definitely something to keep in mind for sure. And again, this could track farther west than this current forecast depicts, which could certainly spell a little bit more trouble in terms of rainfall when it comes to the track of this. Again, though, a direct landfall, extremely unlikely at this point, but still significant winds, rainfall, and wave heights, all of concern.
Yeah, also a thing I want to add is only because the storm is now degrading on satellite and weakening in peak wind intensity, Eyewall replacement cycle is not weakening. It's just that the energy of the tropical cyclone gets redistributed outward, and the wind field grows, and and a bigger radius gets impacted by significant and damaging winds. And also the rainfall gets distributed outward, and that means some parts of the eastern Philippines might get some more rainfall totals.
I just want to call out a few distance markers from locations in the Philippines right now. So at the moment, it's at the closest point to Samar, or I should say the closest point to Samar right now is about 266 kilometers. It's going to close in a little bit more, probably to around 220 kilometers, I would say, to Samar. And then for Catanduanes, probably about 200 kilometers offshore. So from, let's take a look. Well, from Catanduanes right now, 370 kilometers away. Naga is 497. Batangas is 727. Manila 752. There's a question earlier as well about Pangasinan, I think it was again. And anywhere on the western coast there, on Luzon, it will probably not get much at all from this, really. Even rainfall amounts are going to be less than 100 millimeters, it should be, even inland, until you get towards the eastern half of the island. But from Cebu, 519 kilometers, pretty much its closest point. It's not going to get any worse there. You're probably not feeling much anyway. Masbate under signal 1, 426 kilometers.
Go. Yeah, so the storm's not actually that far offshore at all, and it's likely to make its closest approach, I'd say, here to the Philippines itself. Say it's going to do so in about 18 hours.
For where, sorry?
Say it's the case. Just the closest approach to any part of the Philippines. I think it's getting close, but it'll do so within the next 18 hours or so, I think.
To any part? I mean, for Samar, it's going to be in the next 6 hours.
Yeah. And then when do you think Catanduanes is going to get its closest approach?
Well, you're looking at the JTWC forecast track here, and that's where it really slows down. So it could be 24 hours until its closest pass to Catanduanes, or it could be as little as 12. 12 to 24 hours is the time we're looking for Catanduanes there. But what you will see, though, in the wind fields, the pink areas there, the radials, That's the typhoon force winds staying well offshore, hopefully. And the outermost radials there, the red, is tropical storm gale conditions. And as you can see, covering quite a few of the almost all of Samar and Catanduanes and part of eastern Bicol. And just about skimming northern Luzon as well.
Go, and again, that's seen rather clearly there. So tropical storm conditions could occur anywhere from, again, there about Catanduanes and Samar all the way to northern Luzon there. So those are all the areas.
I pretty much figured out, and I'm not sure how true it is now, but it
Yes.
seemed true a few cones ago. The JTWC cone pretty much is anywhere that's got a above zero chance of tropical storm force winds.
Yeah, I
Having
believe
said
it's
that,
the 10% or above contour that they
is
use.
it? Okay. I wanted to know that answer actually. 10%. So basically you're saying anywhere in that cone has a 10% chance or higher.
I believe so, yes. That might not be exactly where it is, but I know it's on the lower end of probabilities when they start including areas like that. So
I know
that's what I know.
Manila right now I think is did it go up to 8%? I can't remember now. But the chances of tropical storm conditions rolling around the screen at the bottom. Let's see if we can take some questions. Start your message with Force 13 all in text if you're watching on YouTube right now live. We're also live on Facebook on Force 13 Philippines this morning as well. You can send a message through there and we'll get your questions aired on both platforms to the best of our ability. We got one or two questions earlier. Let's see. Chances that Surigay affects Japan, first of all.
Well, I think that it's pretty safe to say that those chances are going to be relatively low. I can actually pull up a track spread real quick, courtesy of the GFS here.
Ooh,
there
yes,
it is.
please.
That's our track
That's,
spreads. This is the GFS ensembles.
What is that outlier doing?
Oh yeah.
That is a unique. That's a unique outlier right there. Assuming that doesn't happen, which I don't think it will, and that we don't have another one that slams it right
Oh,
into the
no.
Philippines, which again I don't think it will. The storm's going to go out to sea pretty safely south of Japan. I don't think Japan's really going to see much out of this at all. And if we take a look at the large scale
Yep.
effects of things, we can see here this ridge coming in. Basically, the steering currents are going to shoot this thing out to sea before it gets anywhere near Japan, and we can see that here fairly clearly. This thing takes a turn well before it would get to
Yes.
Japan.
Shot.
So it's not really going to be much of a threat to Japan at all.
And that's
I
pretty much
don't
what you'd
think.
expect for an early season storm.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, pretty much.
I mean, you can see that big extratropical cyclone near Japan that's just gonna pick it up, and actually a new extratropical cyclone digs in, and that's gonna pick it up. I would say the threat to Japan is near 0%.
I would agree.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well.
More questions. Do we have any notes about this storm and what areas could get the worst impacts from Surigay? Well, we sort of clarified that earlier, really, but just to take a look at the Signal 2 warning zones, that's for tropical storm conditions generally, the lower to middle end of tropical storm status. So gusty winds, gales of up to probably 80 kilometers per hour, maybe a little bit more. Sustained winds could be experienced in the Signal 2 zones, and sustained winds over around 50 kilometers per hour perhaps in the Signal 1 zones. But I would say the biggest threat is going to be the rainfall for those areas, as mentioned. At least 300 millimeters expected for the Signal 2 areas.
Yeah, I would agree.
And do we know why there is no longer Recon in the Western Pacific? Well, Recon ended in 1987, I think it was. US Recon that flew into the or was it slightly later? I can't remember now. But they said that computers and satellites were good enough to be as good as Recon, apparently.
And they aren't. Still
And they
now.
aren't in 2021. So, you know.
And I guess money. They don't.
Well, while you
have the
say that, they think you think it might be money, but their spending budget in those years was going up. So I don't know about that.
Oh. Oh. Yeah.
Oh
my God.
Nathan, we have a question on this one that you haven't most likely haven't cited on Facebook, where your location in the Philippines, and also the Eyewall replacement cycle. How long before it completes the process?
I mean, that's extremely difficult to forecast. It could be anywhere from about 6 to 24 hours. Probably a bit later because we lost.
And really, with this one, the earlier it does finish this Eyewall replacement cycle, the earlier it does get that last burst of re-strengthening before it's just full-time weakening. If it doesn't complete this Eyewall replacement cycle until about, say, 24 hours ago, that strengthening window is definitely going to be put severely to a halt. It might not strengthen back again if it does take 24 hours to complete. And we should just see a slow weakening trend for the next few days before it picks up, as it gets picked up by the extratropical cyclone that Noah mentioned and drives it eastwards.
Now, there's a good question there about historical context for April storms. We've been looking at that, and I do a lot of the history stuff. Well, the first people were mentioning Typhoon Isa in 1997, which is a Category 5 on the JTWC. We actually downgraded that slightly to a high-end Category 4. That was an April storm. In 1971, Typhoon Amy reached Category 5 status and 895 millibars on May the 2nd, and it was further out to sea, so maybe that's comparable. And in 1956, Typhoon Thelma went towards the Philippines, much more comparable in track to this storm, although this isn't going to make landfall in the Philippines. That was in April, very similar dates. Category 5, 180 miles per hour apparently, and a pressure of 935 back in 1956. All we really know about that is that the 935 millibar reading was taken when the storm was only at 150 miles per hour. But even if that is borne in mind, the pressure probably wouldn't have been anywhere near as strong as this storm.
Yeah.
And apart from that, there's
So-
no other examples, I don't think.
No, I think Maysac of 2015
Well.
got into April as a Category 5,
Yeah.
but really this is the strongest April Category 5 that we know of, and with this extremely strong MJO pulse we had and the very above average and rich SSTs we had, that just could intensify really to historic levels of intensity for the month.
And there's a second part to that question as well, which came from Jamie Lee Gill. What are our opinion of cyclones strengthening rapidly in 24-hour periods from Category 1 to 5? Did this do that in 24 hours?
No, I
Did
don't.
not.
I don't think so.
So we know this became a Category 1 on our analysis at about 21Z, if I recall, on the 15th, and this became a Category 5 by our analysis during this morning UTC. So that was about 36
9Z.
hours. Yeah, so that would have been 40
9Z
hours.
the 17th.
36 hours?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's somewhere between.
Yeah, so Cat 1 to 5 in 36 hours.
Still impressive.
Okay.
Very, very
Yeah.
impressive. You typically do not see this kind of strengthening in the Western Pacific in April. That is definitely for sure. So this is definitely a very rare historical sight that we witnessed the past 2 days.
Yes. And I've had a question directed to me, which I can't answer. What do we know about Typhoon? I think it was Typhoon Mike.
Oh, yes.
And 200 mile per hour winds.
Well, Devon always rants about that one being an extremely powerful storm. Typhoon Mike, 1990, I assume. We were talking about
I
that
also
one.
do.
Mm.
That's kind of my storm. Everyone knows I'm full about in the public server. And yeah, that was an extremely intense storm. In my opinion, it might have been the most intense storm we've ever seen observed on satellite.
It has a look about it, that's for sure. Very impressive storm. I don't think we can draw many comparisons with its circumstances to this one, though, can we?
No, I don't think. And Mike really maxed out in early November in a similar region, but it didn't recurve. It hit the Philippines just after rapidly weakening due to an hour replacement cycle, and then just even further into the South China Sea and hit Vietnam. So track-wise and also intensity-wise, Mike is much more intense.
So
question.
Oh yes, go ahead.
Sorry, Nathan. I'm just looking at the satellite imagery on the typhoon. Is it stalling?
It's slowing down. It's not. Well, it shouldn't stall, but it is going to move slowly. So you'll certainly notice that in this evening in the Philippines. By the time we check back in the evening, it'll be going much more slowly, we expect.
Yeah, that is what we're currently anticipating, and again, that's depicted on our cone a bit here. The slower turn that we're going to be seeing over the next day or so before it does begin to blaze off there to the north. So that's the current expectation there. There goes the turn, and then it speeds up a bit as we do get the turn there to the northeast. So that's what we're looking at with time here. But again, Philippines probably going to have to deal with a heavy rainfall and high surf concerns, I'd say, for the next 2 to 3 days.
Yeah, at least. Just to reiterate, for those who may just be joining us here, this is another hour of discussion on Typhoon Surigae, Philippine name Bising. Currently with winds by our estimates of 160 miles per hour and a pressure of 914 millibars. So category 5 status still at this point, after our estimated peak intensity earlier of 185 miles per hour and a pressure of 895 millibars, making it probably the most intense April storm in the record books so far, and the strongest. But it has come off its peak, and we are expecting that the recurve will happen rather soon. It's already underway, really, and general movement is towards the northwest. I do wonder whether we've seen a jog to the west in recent hours.
Yeah, I noticed that too, but that's really just wobbling due to the Eyewall replacement cycle. We probably will see another wobble more to the east, and then a bit more to the west, and just a little bit of erratic eye motion, because the inner core is now about to die, and that means the eye doesn't know where to go and wobbles a bit.
Might we be seeing on this satellite imagery here, the close-up, that we might just see that eye. In a way, you can see it's sort of dying off, but it will just plunge and make a bigger eye in just a few short hours, probably.
That's the current expectation, although I think it could take a little bit longer than just 3 or 4 hours. I think we could. I think that this could last for anywhere from, I'd say this eye could. It depends on when the inner eye wall gives in, and we don't know when that's going to happen.
Is it just going to be a situation where it will never finish its eyewall replacement cycle like some storms?
Or it'll just like fail, and I don't see it failing. It's too late in.
Yeah,
stages.
But it will take a long time to warm up that entire stretch of atmosphere that the bigger Eyewall takes up. So it will probably take up to 12 to 24 hours to clear out the bigger eye. That will take a long time because it's very, very large.
Yeah.
Let's see if we've got some more questions just now. Why does the eye warm and cool over and over again? It basically hasn't changed for a few hours. It's not really the case that it's warming and cooling, that's just what we're seeing from the satellite. I don't know if anyone wants to explain that further.
Yeah, when you see the eye warming and cooling on satellite, it's just that some clouds obscure the eye. So, we had a bit earlier when it was on peak, we had the eye temperature fluctuating a bit, and that was just some cloud debris and maybe some cirrus clouds obscuring some parts of it. But that doesn't really influence the exact intensity of the storm or the eye dryness. It's just some at some layer of the atmosphere we have some little clouds in the eye.
And also a good question here, I don't think we've really mentioned this, wind shear values for the storm right now.
So
Probably
wind shear.
very low.
Wind shear generally is fairly low for the storm. I can get, so there we go. So it looks like our average shear is about 12 knots right now. This is according to the GFS, but I do like to use this vortex average SKU-T, which is basically, it gives us a profile into the upper atmosphere, it gives us a good idea of the humidity and the winds, and it gives us some nice parameters over here so we can see what the general environment's looking like. But 25 knots of shear in the upper levels, in the low to mid levels, I mean, and then overall shear is relatively low, but moderate shear there. Right now, I'd say the storm is experiencing low to moderate shear. If this were something to go off of. And then another point of reference that we have is the deep layer shear, courtesy of RAM's multi-diagnostic comparison plot, which is basically a group of numerous weather models plotted here. And because we don't really have good observations in the Western Pacific and this part of the ocean for wind shear, model initialization is some of the best stuff we got. But it looks like around the 5 to 10 knot range, 5 to 15 knots. For the overall shear is what we're getting, and that lines up pretty well with our 12 knots. So I'd say about 10 knots of shear is probably what this is getting right now overall, which, with a storm this big, probably isn't going to do too much.
Another question there about 95W. I don't know if you want to touch on that one, but
it's dead.
Yeah, there was a tiny bit of model support that made us gave 10%, and on our T-Coast we've just deactivated it, so it doesn't look like that's going to do anything at all.
Well, I'd like to say spot the invest. What was 95W? I wasn't awake for this. Was this it?
No, that's not it. It's to the southwest.
So it's this.
It's slightly off our screen. Hold on, we'll try and... if you could scroll
looked
down just a tiny bit.
Oh, okay.
I looked at the invest, but it's extremely weak even on satellite. So it's so weak and so close to the equator. I would be immensely surprised if that did anything.
At the moment, it's only 1 degree north, and I learned a new place in my geography notebook because the storm, the invest closest point to land was 229 miles west of Kapingamarangi, which is an island atoll part of Micronesia, right on the equator. So that's one that I've not had to talk about before.
Yeah, no, 95W looks like trash. I'm not worried about it at all. I think that's probably not going to develop. I think that's pretty safe to say at this point. Yeah. So there you go. That's your question answered.
Okay, a couple more questions. How large is Surigay right now? That's a good question. I've not actually measured that for a little while. And of course, there's different ways that you can measure the size of the storm. If you're going to take it on a face value, really, and just take a look at how large the storm's influence is, its cloud coverage, you could make an argument that the storm, some of its clouds extend into the South China Sea now. In other areas towards the southernmost volcano islands of Japan, so that's about 3,000 kilometers. Of course, that's not really useful information. The main core of the storm, I would say, is around somewhere around 700 kilometers in diameter. As for wind fields, does anyone have that data right now?
I think the radius of outermost isobar was 360 nautical miles, so that's quite big. Usually you have values about 150 to 200. So the influence of the storm is quite large compared to your average typhoon or cyclone.
I do have some data here. This is ADT's wind field, so this is derived from climatology given similar situations. So this shows here the pretty large extent of tropical storm force winds, and then there are your typhoon force winds. So typhoon force winds well offshore, but again extending 70 nautical miles there to the northeast, 50 nautical miles to the southeast, to the southwest 30, and to the northwest 65 nautical miles there for
Now
typhoon
that's
force.
suggesting that tropical storm force winds are right on the coast of northeastern Samar right now.
Yes, they are, and I would say maybe that's a little aggressive, but if you look at JTWC, their wind field quadrant, they have it right off the coast there as well, with it actually jutting out just enough. You might even argue, if you were to smooth out the line, that they might be just on shore. So I think that this is probably a pretty accurate depiction of what's going on right now in terms of the storm itself. So that's a general idea of wind fields.
What's the radius of R40, R34?
R34?
Yeah, what's the radius?
The radius just from there, I can give you quadrants if that would be useful to you.
Oh,
Yeah, it's hard to see the numbers there.
Yeah, there's
biggest quadrant.
But the biggest quadrant, which is the northeastern, is at 200 nautical miles. The next quadrant at 170, the southeast at 170, the northwest at 195, and the southwest at 130 nautical miles. So the smallest quadrant is actually the one closest to the Philippines. So the nice thing is, smaller wind field means that tropical storm force winds aren't as far inland as they could be. Bad news is, because this is undergoing an Eyewall replacement cycle, the odds are that this wind field overall is going to expand a bit and be more symmetrical. So we could see significant expansion of those tropical storm force winds with time. But as this moves north, that could mean that the storm moves just fast enough that it outruns itself in terms of how quickly it grows that wind field.
Yeah, and we have another question about, do we all agree with the JTWC peak estimate of 165 knots? I have to say I don't agree. I have it a slightly bit lower, and we as Force 13 also have it about 5 knots lower at 185 miles per hour.
Now, to be clear, I did talk to our chief analyst earlier today, Devin, and I also talked to Kay, another one of our analysts, and we've generally decided that our 160 knot peak is reasonable. We feel good about it, but we don't think that 165 knots is out of the question. So we don't think that the JTWC is wrong. We definitely don't think that. But if we were to make the call again, Force 13's call 185 miles per hour, JTWC's 190. I think both are reasonable, but we are going to be sticking with 185.
Yeah, pending proper reanalysis. I mean, I can't see it
post-analysis. We can't rule out in post-analysis.
Never can. But they might change things too. Anyway, there's some questions on Facebook just there. The conditions in Camarines Sur. Well, you can see just looking back to the warnings that they are under Signal 1 warnings fully. Let me just see if I can take a little look at the estimated rainfall, satellite-derived rainfall right now. Not much going on in that area. There's a little bit of rainfall on the northeastern part near Catanduanes, around 5 millimeters per hour. It doesn't look like there's any rain on the way just yet. Just trying to get my bearings on this. Although that shower could be growing a little bit. In terms of wind speeds, though, it's still going to remain fairly calm. It's going to pick up a little bit throughout the course of today. And by tonight, you'll probably see the strongest winds, which will be approaching, but probably won't reach gale force. And as for rainfall, probably 200 to 300 millimeters in total.
All right, and looks like our chief cyclone analyst is here, Devin Williams. Welcome to the stream. What are your thoughts on the storm right now, on Surigay, and what do you think the future holds?
Well, I'm going to say something very similar to the effects I did during Typhoon Goni. The storm has already passed a very intense first peak. It's undergoing an Eyewall replacement cycle. Once it completes the Eyewall replacement cycle, there's really no reason why the storm won't recover most, if not all, of its intensity back. Once it completes it, this storm's definitely not going away anytime soon. Looks like the good thing is that this at least looks like it's going to stay mostly away from land. Hopefully that continues to be the case. Definitely is looking very unlikely for a landfall at peak intensity, which is very good. Just keep a very close eye on this storm. Gales will be coming onshore. I'm pretty sure about that. We just touched on the rainfall, so we got those aspects out. But yeah, as far as the next day and a half, we're going to be talking about the storm recovering its intensity from the Eyewall replacement cycle, and then likely slow and steady weakening afterwards as the storm ends up slowing down significantly as it continues to move off to the north and west.
Yep. We had another question just there as well about what to expect in the Cavite area as well. That again is on the western part of Luzon, so you're probably not looking really at tropical storm conditions, very unlikely, less than 10%. Rainfall amounts will probably reach 50 to 100 millimeters at most in that area. There was some more questions there as well that came in. Samuel says, if you look at the jet stream and how the extratropical is sort of exploding south of Japan, does it not concern you, or is it worth mentioning? I'm not sure what you make of that when you were looking at the models earlier, Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, I have it pulled up here. We have the extratropical cyclone there near Japan, and, these things move through here relatively often. Heavy rainfall, gusty winds, that's something that Japan's pretty used to. When it comes to the storm that's going to pick up Surigay, the extratropical cyclone there, it doesn't look like that's really going to be of anything of too much significance. So I don't see any reason for huge concern in terms of extratropical activity. And if I'm in Japan, again, when it comes to Surigay itself, virtually 0% chance of being impacted. Although it should be noted that we do have one crazier outlier that shows some of those. Are those the Ryukyu Islands? But very, very unlikely. But I think it's worth mentioning that the chances are not zero. Yeah. They're near zero, but they're not absolutely zero. So just something to keep an eye on. Unlikely to do much, but in the event that it does something crazy, I guess the whole thing is don't say I didn't warn you. So that's really where I'm at this point. But quite unlikely to do much of anything. If we do start to see reason to believe that this were to bring bigger impacts, we'll be sure to let you know as soon as we know.
Well, here's another tough question for you. What's the highest intensity this storm could obtain after its Eyewall replacement cycle?
So are we talking within, like, the I think most likely it won't even get back to its first peak. Most likely. Now,
I really
it
don't,
could.
Thomas.
I hope
I
not.
really
It,
don't.
I really
it
hope
could
it doesn't.
do.
I
It
don't
could
think-
happen, and I know that we don't think it will, but I really don't think that we should rule it out. It getting back up to its first peak. But that's about where I'd say the cap is for it, especially since ocean heat content's going to start dropping off here relatively soon. So it depends on how quickly that Eyewall replacement cycle completes, but I certainly expect some re-strengthening to take place. And if it does drop below a Cat 5 overnight, which it certainly could, I think we'll probably see it be a Cat 5 again.
That I do
Find
agree
more
with.
than
I
It's
think
dropped
it.
below
I think
Cat
it.
5 now.
Yeah, I think it will drop below soon and then reattain Category 5 briefly.
That's again, I think that as well, but I don't think it will obtain it for very long.
So
But that's
If I
my
had-
personal.
a variety of thoughts there on that one. And has the Philippines, for the most part, dodged a bullet in regards to Surigay?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, there wasn't supposed to be a bullet to begin with, though, because it was supposed to be harmlessly out to sea the whole time.
Well, not necessarily. There
In the
was
earlier models.
In the earlier models, this storm was supposed to go near Guam.
Yes. This was
Yes.
supposed to be a Woo Tip-like situation.
There was a near scare for a day or two, because there was models that were shifting very much westward, trying to bring it much closer to the coast than it is right now. And that was when things really started to get worrisome. Thankfully, they shifted back east, and the storm is following that track now. There wasn't really necessarily like a large landfall that was expected to take place. It just was trying to bring the Eyewall much closer to shore, which would have been good.
It got to the point where landfall chances at 48 hours started to exceed 1 in 3. So I pretty much had to go out and say that there's going to be a CDPS rating for it, which it did. That's been revoked now since the landfall chances on Samar are, unless something weird happens, they're 0 at this point. It's past Samar. The eye has passed Samar anyways. So, luckily, I don't think that it's going to make landfall further north and west. If it does, it's going to be during its weird stalling out phase where it kind of just wobbles closer to shore. Hopefully, it doesn't do anything like that.
Another question there as well about Baguio in northern Luzon. The ECMWF still shows a close approach to northern Luzon, and should they be concerned? In that location in particular, not really. Winds won't be getting up there. That's near the western part of Luzon. Those locations further east, Santiago, Tuguegarao, Santa Ana, locations like that, they've still got around, well, they're on the screen there actually, around 20% chances of tropical storm conditions, so it can't be ruled out in those locations. As for rainfall, you're probably looking at fairly low amounts again, probably not above 100 millimeters in the west, and in the eastern part of Luzon, maybe 200 to 300 at worst.
Yeah, and also with the Euro, that kind of has a stronger ridge bias, so it makes sense that it takes the storm a bit further west.
Yeah, Thomas, you're looking at that.
Yeah, I am looking at the Euro right now, so we can see clearly what was being talked about with it. But yeah, there's the storm right there, Surigay, and we can see its northward trajectory here, the slowdown that occurs. So this is at Monday. And then on Tuesday, we have the storm approaching, and then the closest approach occurs on Wednesday, and it's quite close there. That's about 113 nautical miles away from the center. So that's not far at all before it does blaze out to sea, but certainly something to watch. If I'm in Luzon, especially there at the northeastern tip, I'm watching this closely because, again, we even see on some GFS ensembles some closer calls being a possibility. So the Euro solution isn't completely impossible. Do I think that the storm's going to track this far west? Probably not. But it could happen, and it's something that needs to be considered for sure. And I think that people in the northeastern side of Luzon need to be preparing as if they're going to be struck by a Category 1 or 2 typhoon.
So there we have it. That concludes our hour of coverage on the storm, and that was our team. You can see them all there, and I'm sure we'll be seeing them again very soon. That was a very quick hour, and I'm sure we got through a lot to discuss there. We did indeed. The storm heading towards the northwest at this time, holding on to Category 5 status as it endures an Eyewall replacement cycle, with 80% chance of tropical storm conditions for Catanduanes right now, and for those areas in Signal 2 warnings, which is there, and also for Samar, we could be looking at storm wind speeds approaching and exceeding 50 miles per hour or 80 kilometers per hour sustained with higher gusts, and that's coming very soon in the next 24 hours for those areas. Its closest approach to Samar will be during the course of the daylight hours today. We'll have more updates on the Force 13 channel. You can also join our community Discord server, discord.gg/Force13, to chat with many people in all parts of the world, quite a few in the Philippines as well, about the latest on this storm. And you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter, search Force 13 all in text, and we've got lots and lots of videos coming out on this as it progresses and remains a threat for the Philippine Islands. But for now, that's it from here at Force 13 HQ. Good night from here, and hopefully all goes well with this storm as it continues to, let's hope it steers straight out to sea. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.